Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Američki urednik i novinar Peter Maass izvještavao je iz ratova u Iraku, Afganistanu i u Bosni i Hercegovini. O ratu u Gazi i izraelskim ratnim zločinima pisao je za Američki Post. Za Al Jazeeru govori kako je Izraelu dozvoljeno da provodi ratne zločine nad Palestincima jer je, za razliku od Rusije, Izrael saveznik SAD-u. Maass također povlači paralele između rata u Gazi i rata u Bosni, te govori o novom izdanju svoje knjige Ljubi bližnjeg svoga, koje je promovisano tokom festivala knjige Bukstan u Sarajevu.
Peter, welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans program. It is always a pleasure to see you back in Sarajevo.
Thank you.
So before discussing the new edition of your book, Love Thy Neighbor, A Story of War, let's talk about the current warfare and the article you wrote in April this year for Washington Post titled, I'm Jewish and I've covered wars. I know war crimes when I see them. What was the turning point for you when you realized what Israel is doing in Gaza is not self-defense?
You know, seeing the videos that everybody else was also seeing of individuals, civilians, being hit by bullets, being hit by bombs, when it was very clear that they're civilians in Gaza. In particular, there was one video of a Gazan woman who was walking with her grandson.
With the white flag?
Exactly. The grandson was holding a white flag. This was a group of civilians, and they were just trying to get to a safer place. Daytime, you could see everything. And she was shot by a sniper, killed by a sniper. And that's the kind of thing, I saw that in Sarajevo, under my hotel window from the Holiday Inn. Saw it in many parts of this country. It happened all over the place. The absolutely direct targeting of somebody who was clearly a civilian, no mistake about it. When you see something like that, that is a war crime. And there was so much that was similar to that going on in Gaza. That also went on in Bosnia, that it was just like impossible for me not to see the connection. I mean, I had written a story about watching a civilian in Sarajevo be shot by a sniper right next to the Holiday Inn, sniper in Grbavica. And then I'm seeing a very identical thing happen before my eyes in Gaza. And that wasn't, I'd say, a turning point, but that was certainly something where...
A starting point.
It was a start. There was a starting point even earlier than that, I suppose. But that was just something that was just like, you know, my God, you know, how much more evidence do you want of criminal activity in wartime?
But unlike Sarajevo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is dangerously underreported story, and that is Israel forbids international journalists, like you were in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you could witness yourself the war crimes. Israel forbids international journalists to enter and independently report on the devastation in the Gaza Strip. And meanwhile, Israeli forces killed over 140 journalists in Gaza in just a few months. Even the members of their families, sometimes the entire families of journalists. So why the World Journalism Associations and the world media are not loud about this?
They should be louder. I mean, they haven't been silent. I think, you know, Committee to Protect Journalists and other organizations have made statements. I mean, somewhat famously...
Statements, but not actions.
Exactly. So they have made statements. There could be more statements. There could be harsher statements. And there could be something that goes beyond statements that still is within the realm of, you know, legality that they don't do. And you're right about that. If this were... you know, this many journalists being targeted intentionally by, let's say, Russian forces in Ukraine, I think that what you would have heard from American media organizations or other media organizations would have been, you know, multitudes more louder, multitudes more effective than what's been heard as a result of what's been going on there.
What is the cause of this? Why is this so?
I mean, you know, the cause of it, it's almost kind of too banal to kind of, you know, say it, but, you know, as far as I see it, you know, the fact is that you know, Israelis are kind of regarded for a long time as American allies, and, you know, America has supported Israel in pretty much all of its actions. And the victims in this case are Muslim. And this is, you know, something that was also relevant with respect to Bosnia. You know, why didn't America and other countries react more strongly than they did? You know, if it had been, let's say, the Bosnian army attacking Belgrade, there would have been a very different reaction in the world than there was with respect to Serbs attacking Sarajevo. So, the identity of the victims is key, and the identity of the perpetrators, who are allies of the United States, is also key. And that's, I think, what accounts for a lot of what's going on.
And of course, it doesn't justify it.
No.
How is this possible? Because we see this information blackout, and we can call it human rights violation, war crime blackout, and it's being tolerated for over 9 months now.
I mean, tolerated certainly by a lot of governments, yes, because Israel is their ally. Individual journalists, if we're talking about journalists, I mean, I know, practically every war correspondent I know would, gladly go to Gaza if they could. They don't have the power to do that because obviously it's the Israeli government that controls those borders. And, the American government has no interest in pushing the Israelis on that particular issue. So, it's just, Israel is in a position where it has the power to absolutely exclude everybody it wants to from Gaza. When I covered the invasion of Iraq, for example, the American government had a policy that only journalists who are embedded with the American military can go into Iraq at the same time that the American military was going in. But I and a number of other journalists just said, no, we're not going to do it that way. And we rented our own vehicles in Kuwait, and we kind of snuck into Iraq. It was a chaotic situation at the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border when the invasion was happening, and we found ways in, and we disguised ourselves in some cases as soldiers or soldier-adjacent people. That is impossible, obviously, in Israel. I mean, there's no way for anybody to sneak in or talk their way into Gaza from the Egyptian side or from the Israeli side. The absolute control that those borders are under is, I think, a key factor because, in Afghanistan in 2001, again, I mean, the Taliban was still in control of most of the country, and I was able to sneak in there when there was a very fluid situation. While the Taliban still held Kandahar. And that's just, it's an unusual situation that a border is controlled so completely. I mean, in Syria, journalists were able to move around, not obviously in the Assad-controlled parts of Syria, but they were able to move around in various parts of Syria.
The media has a key role, right, to inform the public, to educate the public. Otherwise, it's just manufacturing consent, right, to war crimes and justifying the war crimes, demonizing the enemy. We know this from the book on Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, right? One of the things that he dissected also was the vision of worthy and unworthy victims, which we could have seen in the recent so-called rescue mission. So Israeli forces rescued 4 Israeli civilians, but in the process they killed 274 Palestinian civilians, which are mostly women and children. We haven't heard this rescue mission that ended up as a massacre. We haven't heard this in the Western media, in the Israeli media. So the question is, why do we still have this selective justice, selective empathy, although both are oxymorons? When will we see the moral consistency? When will we see the equal valuation of all human lives?
I mean, have we ever seen that? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Do governments, and forget about just the American government, you pick any government, put a blindfold on, put your finger on a map. Is that government a moral government that is morally consistent? The odds are that the country that you put your finger on, the answer will be no, because there are really very few yeses on the map.
Bosnia was no exception, you said, and I will quote, "What happened in Bosnia was not a Balkan freak show, but a violent process of national breakdown at the hands of political manipulators." So this can happen to any country, as we can see now, under the given circumstances when these manipulators create the opportunities to activate the wild beast. So who are these manipulators that you are referring to?
I mean, the manipulators are, political, for the most part, political actors, whether they're elected or not elected. That's who I was really talking about. I mean, obviously, in the context of the former Yugoslavia, it's kind of the name brands that you know, the Milosevic's, the Tudjmans, but then also the Šešels and others who, at that time, somebody like Šešel wasn't elected to office, I don't think at the time, but, was obviously one of the people. And so it's not just at that high level, but it is kind of on a political level, I'd say, when I'm talking about the manipulators. Because, and I don't want to sound naive when I say this, but, ordinary people can be nasty to each other, yes, of course. But, they're not wanting to make war because...
They have to be fooled into war, as Assange said.
They need to be fooled or persuaded or scared or cowed into war. It's just, to be, have a rivalry with your neighbor and to get in an argument with your neighbor, yeah, all the time, sure. Normal human behavior. But to want to create a militia, create a pretense for war to erase all of your neighbors, even people who aren't your neighbors, who you've never met before and who live, not close by at all, that's beyond kind of what an individual would ordinarily want, and it's the political manipulators who kind of, get that process going, push it along, take advantage of, all the vulnerabilities that we all have.
So the manipulators would be the states, the current regimes,
and propagandists. We were talking about journalists here earlier. There are, I won't call them journalists, but, there are people who have access to media who push out very hateful material. That, is part of this kind of creation of a poisonous atmosphere. It was very important for Milosevic to have control of the media in Serbia. That was, an essential tool. It was very important for, in Rwanda for the Hutus to control, particularly radio stations there, to get their genocide going. So, state-controlled media or media that is controlled and used for political purposes, where individuals inside of these organizations are not journalists, but they are provocateurs, that's part of the problem too.
Clinton's biographer, I remember, once said to the frontline journalist, if I'm not wrong, if you look at Bosnia, you can see the entire presidency. If we look at Gaza now, do we see the entire US presidency? Because Bosnia had Bill Clinton. Who do Palestinians have? We have seen the political debate, presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and it was more of a competition who supports Israel more. The only time the word Palestinian was used, it was used as an insult. So what does this tell us about the US?
It tells you that, very sadly, very tragically, the kind of, the elites of the two major American parties in the United States are not, forget about coming to the rescue of Palestinians, which, people were hoping for with respect to Bosnia and the American government, and in a very belated way, it kind of did. It's not that they're going to come to the rescue, it's that they're, going to continue, helping the effort to suppress and to kill these people. And it's for me, it's an even worse situation than what we saw in Bosnia. The American government, which I was incredibly critical of during the Bosnian War and incredibly critical of in the book I wrote because it stood on the sidelines while a genocide was being committed, while it knew a genocide was being committed and made excuses all the time. Now it's involved actively. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised because of the long-time relationship between the United States government and the Israeli government, but to actually see this happen is even, more disheartening than what I saw in Bosnia. And I was pretty damn disheartened to see kind of the amoral position that my government took then.
There is another concerning issue when it's up to the U.S. Recently, the U.S. House passed an amendment bearing the use of the Gaza death toll. So they deny the numbers of those killed. Some U.S. officials call this an institutional genocide denial. And just to remind the public, WikiLeaks published a document that revealed the fact that the numbers, the civilians killed in Afghanistan was even higher than it was reported and revealed to the public. 15,000 more Afghanistans were killed. So do we see the same pattern here with denying or undercounting Gaza death toll?
Yeah, it's certainly, it's actually, The thing is the U.S. government, if you watch the State Department briefings, these are very smart individuals who are giving the briefings, who are speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, who slip around everything. I mean, they don't say like, that number is absolutely wrong, the actual number is this. They're not necessarily kind of denying a particular number. They're just saying, none of these numbers are right, we don't really know, which is obviously a form of denial, but they're just kind of like smart enough.
Those numbers were confirmed and are confirmed by the UN agency and institutions.
Yeah.
So why is it so problematic?
I mean, it's problematic to admit this level of civilian casualties, particularly like casualties of children, for example. You know, and at the same time say, yes, we're going to continue to supply weapons to the regime that is responsible for this. So it's kind of like once you get involved in aggression, warfare of aggression, you kind of have to deny its consequences. Otherwise, how can you justify its continuation? And so, you know, I mean, there's no satisfaction in seeing these government officials kind of squirm around and patently lie in a way that, you know, in their private moments, hopefully they're embarrassed about. It gives no satisfaction because it doesn't change anything at all. You know, the policy continues.
We do have in Europe, we've seen the European elections, and we do have Europe turning or taking a turn to far right. Mm-hmm. And it seems like we are reliving the 30s, where fascist governments are on the rise. And on the other side, we have a crumbling of the world institutions that were built after the Second World War to preserve global peace and human rights. So, does this mean, with fascism on the rise from one side and crumbling peace consensus from the other side, that we are sliding in what you called sinister dimension? Or better angels of our nature will prevail?
I mean, it's a really low odds bet to put your money on the, you know, angels of a better nature to triumph. You know, yes. You know, you're reminding me, it's a strange thing to write a book and to then have people quote parts of it to you 30 years later. You know, the line that I have in this book about, you know, sliding into a sinister dimension is one that I hadn't thought of. And I'm being reminded of it now.
We are kind of living the episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, it obviously feels that way, obviously looks that way. Every day, you know, there's just like something in my own country, America, something even worse happening than on the previous day. You know, yesterday's Supreme Court rulings that were just horrifying. So yes, we certainly are in a less safe place with respect to democracy, with respect to human rights obligations, et cetera, than we were a year ago, 5 years ago, and all that. It's terrifying. You know, but...
We need to hear that but.
But who knows what's going to happen, okay? You know, you cannot predict. There are so many ways in which people acting smartly, acting strongly, can not reverse everything so that, like, all of a sudden we snap our fingers and all is good, but just that this direction, that this sinister dimension that we kind of are heading into, maybe veer a bit away from it. And then, like, whatever, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, totally veer in the opposite direction and you know, my God, we're making the world a better place. So to not be able to succeed entirely right now in, like, making things right is okay. We can wait for total success. We just need to kind of do the best we can now to make sure that we don't keep sliding down.
Okay, but one ray of light could be the release of Julian Assange.
I mean, he should have been, you know, he should never have been prosecuted. You know, governments have their secrets and want to keep their secrets. And there's kind of nothing more dangerous to them than, you know, kind of piercing that kind of, you know, power that they have to possess these secrets that, you know, don't even need to be secrets, that wouldn't even harm them if they're released. There are some that would harm them if they're released. And, you know, it's not just Assange. There are so many people who have been prosecuted in America for leaking classified information to journalists. So, you know, there were issues with him in Sweden that were legitimate criminal issues that, you know, were probably more legally based than anything that he did with respect to publishing classified U.S. government documents. But with respect to you know, receiving and then publishing classified government information, I mean, this is journalistic activity. And the only kind of, you know, bitter aspect of you know, his release is that he had to plead guilty to this count, where, you know, he says, oh yes, you know, what I did was wrong, it broke a law. And, you know, that is the kind of bitter part of it, because it establishes kind of as a precedent that, you know, yes, you know, journalists, you know, can be published, you know, can be prosecuted under the Espionage Act and plead guilty for publishing classified government information. And that should not be the case. But he is free now.
He is free now. You mentioned several times that 30 years passed from writing the book Love Thy Neighbor. What this new edition entails?
Well, the new edition, I mean, I have to say that the new edition is the same as when it was originally published, which I think is good, because I think there's something, you don't want to adjust, you know, what you wrote 30 years ago. I mean, things have changed, obviously, but I didn't want to update it because I just thought, like, once you begin to update something, you have to update everything, and then it becomes another work entirely. What is very new is the cover, which is, I mean, it's weird when you're talking about a book about war to talk about a beautiful cover, or the cover, just to even talk about the cover.
Because we know the content is high quality, so.
Yeah, but the cover is a photograph that was taken in Sarajevo by Paul Lowe during the war. And the design that my publisher here, BuyBook, came up with, it's a really kind of haunting cover that kind of perfectly transmits, I think, not just the war and the terribleness of it, but also a sense of I don't know, hope that comes out of it. Bosnia is still here, you know. People are still here. People are still having kids.
Yeah. So we have the new edition 30 years after. What do you hope new readers will gain from this book?
I receive, I guess regularly, emails from readers saying that, you know, they didn't know anything or they didn't understand Bosnia, and then they read my book and their eyes were opened. And sometimes I receive things like that from, and this is the most incredible thing, from Bosnians, which, like, you know, receiving an email from an American or whatever saying, you know, you, Mr. American author, you know, help me understand what happened in Bosnia, is like, okay, that's very nice, that's my job. It's a different matter when it comes from a Bosnian. It feels very strange, actually, to be a foreigner, to have people say, you know, who know this country better, who live in this country, you know, you help me understand it. And I don't really know how to kind of, you know, respond to that. But it's really important. You know, I look around here in Sarajevo, and, you know, most people I'm dealing with are not my age, are younger than me. You know, I don't know what the population distribution is demographically in this country, but, you know, there's a very large number of people in this country who were not born when this war happened, who were not really educated about the war. You know, maybe they were 5 or 6 years old when they started in school, and it wasn't being taught yet, or maybe, you know, they weren't even going to school in Bosnia. And so as there is in America, a lot of people who don't know about Vietnam. I didn't know much about Vietnam when I was a kid because it was a war that was fought before I really was cognizant of these things. So this is a ridiculously long answer to your question. I'm really sorry. But I just think there's a lot of people, even in this country, obviously, who don't know really what it was like to live during this war, what happened, how it happened, and to read about it in a way that is personal. This is a personal book. It's my memoir. It's my view of what happened and of what happened to me, too. So, you know, every generation needs to learn these things, needs to learn their history. And so if this can be of help to this generation, I mean, fantastic. And that's why I'm really glad that it's now available again.
Peter, thank you for your work, for your courage during the Bosnian and war reporting from Bosnia, and for your time now in Sarajevo.
Thank you very much.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?